Luke, it's your time. Let me cue up the music.
So, the title of this is Shadows Over the House in the Desert. When I was 10 years old, I lived in the desert outside of Tucson, Arizona. There, my mother and I lived in a house with her significant other, Rick. I would have fun playing outside in the sand and playing around the cacti. It was a decent place. Our closest neighbor was a mile down the dusty dirt road, and no one else around for miles. Good hike down behind the house was a railroad track. Trains would go by once in a blue moon, and the distant whistle could be heard faintly from our house. Everything was going well until Rick's mother passed away. Once that happened, he changed. He became more aggressive. It was understandable considering the tragedy, but it kept getting worse. Each day, he seemed to become more and more disturbed. My mother was not a religious woman, but one night she felt the need to pray. She prayed for me, for herself, and for him. She went to place her hand on him as she prayed. As soon as her hand made contact, Rick shot up, gasping, "Too light, must get to the dark." And he left the bed and he went to go sleep on the couch. My mom was terrified, unsure of what to do. After a minute, she got out of bed to go check on him. He was dead asleep. She tried talking to him. Rick started muttering about trains. She wasn't sure what he was on about. Then, a second later, the distant sound of the train could be heard. Since Rick started changing, I had also been experiencing phenomena. Each night, I would go to bed, couldn't sleep. There was something there. It wasn't the usual shadows cast by things that make monsters in a kid's mind. No, this was real. There were a dozen shadow figures standing in my room. Very clear, black figures with distinctly human shape stood around the room, looking at me. They had no features, but I knew they were looking at me. They were there every night. Couldn't sleep. Each night they became clearer and less like shadows. They became these bluish creatures with pure red eyes and sharp teeth that jutted out of their mouth, but still had the shape of humans. They were always looking at me, and now they had features. I could see they were smiling. All of this came to a head on my birthday. Rick and my mother were in an argument. I was told to step outside. I did so. I couldn't hear them after that. I sat outside for several minutes. Suddenly, every fiber of my being told me to go back into the house. I ran back inside and I saw Rick ready to strike my mother in the head. I yelled. He stopped. Brother ran to me and we ran out the door. We got into the truck and drove off as fast as we could. As we drove away, Rick threw a rock that cracked the rear window. We never returned to that house. We never saw Rick again, and I have never seen another shadow person.
Yeah, that's creepy. I guess a lot of times you hear about these entities that appear and stuff. Sometimes negative energy can attract them. Some people would say, right?
That was my thought process on the whole thing. That seemed like what he was going through brought something into that house.
Yeah, that is terrifying. See what people are saying here. That gave me serious chills. People, yeah, me too. So people are saying as they comment along here live. I think it was interesting that they went into the detail about seeing the features.
Yeah.
Typically, you don't talk about shadow people and facial features.
That was something I thought was interesting too. He mentioned at first they didn't, and then each night as things got progressively worse, they became more full-featured. And I actually had never heard of a shadow person becoming like this, like bluish looking or whatever, and then having these sharp teeth. So that was a different spin on it for me. I thought that was interesting, and I thought it seems like someone can be made to be worse under these conditions too. Like Rick was clearly getting worse as their influence grew also. It just seemed like there was they were feeding off each other almost kind of thing.
Makes you wonder if when he had the tragedy happen, you said his mother had passed away. Story
Yeah,
had said that, excuse me. It makes you wonder if that leaves a person vulnerable for like that sort of thing to happen to them.
I believe so. Yeah.
Assuming something has, I don't want to, overtaken is like such a strong thing, has got somehow involved with him. I don't know how else to word it. You know what I'm saying, though?
Absolutely. I do believe so. I think it depends on the person. It depends on how the person that you knew passed away. I think those things all contribute to what could happen to you. And I do believe that certain things will leave you more vulnerable to some sort of darkness, something that you don't want to have in you. It all comes down to how you let it affect you.
Someone asked, do you think they could see them clear because it was getting worse, like progressively worse? You think that was making the entity become more visible?
I think it was the whole tragedy of the situation forcing itself on his mind that allowed him to perceive these things. It was like stripping away the barrier between one world and another.
Yeah, that's terrifying. I think it's fortunate though that when they got out of the situation, they didn't experience it anymore. Like it's not something that followed them, this evil thing or whatever it was.
Yeah. Yeah, it seemed like it was there in that house. He was 10 at the time, and I kind of wonder what happened to this Rick after that. They never saw him again.
He's 10 years old at the time. We don't know what happened with him, the Rick guy ever again, but we do know that it ended and escalated to the point where he was chasing down the car and threw a rock at it as they were leaving his. So they lived at Rick's house, I assume. They
Yeah.
moved in with Rick, and this was like the one night it all escalated, and that's when they decided to get out of there.
Yeah. It was when he was about ready to actually hit his wife.
What? Yeah, so they never saw him again.
Yeah.
Probably for the best.
Yeah, definitely.
Makes
Yeah.
you wonder what happened with the guy, though.
Can't imagine it ended well.
No, I wouldn't think so.
Jeff Townsend Media. CG, good night.
And the question is, do I stay here? Will you be back? Are you gonna come back? Will you be back? Are you coming back?